Facebook page and YouTube channel. My name is Annie. I am the events coordinator at Majors in Quinn. We are glad that you're here. If you're watching, sorry for the slight delay. We are all, subject to the whims of the internet gods these days. So we're here, and we are here with Minnesota author Janet Graber. So we're very excited to hear from her novel, The Sting of Love. This is her first novel for adults, although Janet has written several books for children and young adults as well. So she's going to take you through this family saga historical novel, and we will be happy to take questions from you at the end of the reading. So type questions in the comments field if you have questions for her anytime along the way. We can see them and we will get to them. So thank you very much. Just a quick reminder that majorsinquinn.com is where you want to go if you want to check out the book and take a look at it and maybe buy it. We would just love for you to support this local author and an independent bookstore. I will drop a link directly to that book in the comments. So without further ado, here is Janet Graber to read to you from The Sting of Love.
Hello, everybody. And for those of you who are watching who know me, this was absolutely going to happen. We lost all connections about a minute ago. And of course, I was in a complete panic. So here we are. So let's hope that it doesn't happen again. I just want to reintroduce myself a little bit. I was born and raised in England, which if you read the novel, will you realize the connections. I was a war baby and did not meet my father until I was 3 years old. And I think this had quite a profound effect on my life moving forward. And I was very close to him, and I could not have written this novel, this historical novel, while he was still alive, for many reasons. Until he died, I was, as Annie said, a writer of children's books. And after he died, I began to wonder how in the world I could spin the very few comments he ever made about World War II and his experiences into a novel. And that was connected with the fact that he was in Trieste, northern Italy, for a year after the war as part of the occupation force. And there was a huge amount of history going on in that city at the time that people are really not aware of. It was really, in many ways, a salvo that started the Cold War. But if people are interested in that portion of it, I can answer questions later about that. So I would like to read a couple of sections from the historical novel. It's set in Trieste, 1945-46, and that story is told in the point of view of the soldier who was there. And it is also told in the point of view of his daughter in England and America 50 years later. So there's quite a span of countries. There is Italy, Slovenia, Minnesota in America, and London, England. So yes, I did want to mention this first. There is a quote at the beginning of the novel, which is, "Every moment in your life, every event is a story in itself." And this was a quote from Vida German, who was a Slovene partisan in World War II, and she was born in 1923. She is still alive. She is 97 years old, and she has much to do with this. So much information was gathered from Vida and her granddaughter while my daughter and I were researching the book. She is on my website. There's a beautiful picture of her holding the book, if anyone is interested. So I'm going to start by reading chapter 1. I can't rid myself of an uneasy sense that my dearest daddy is keeping something from me, a sense that all is not right in his world. He's been uncharacteristically contrary and peevish for the past few days, snapping at his cleaning lady, the most obliging person one could wish to meet, and at the last minute declining to attend a matinee with us at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre in Stratford. I've promised myself to get to the bottom of what is bothering him before my daughters and I return to the States. Usually I would be basking in the sheer pleasure of this English summer evening. The restaurant buzzes with comfortable conversation, a gentle tinkle of crystal, the muted clamor of china plates. Windows open onto the terrace offer a view of distant hills awash in twilight shadow. Louisa and Annabelle are with me to celebrate my father's 77th birthday, and our satisfying meal is drawing to a close. The roast lamb, locally sourced, was pink and juicy, the wine a smooth, full-bodied Barolo. Adding to my disquiet, there is a sudden gush of angry words between my supposedly grown daughters. They've bickered all day, a common occurrence, but now it's exploding into a knockdown, drag-out confrontation. Don't you feel the least bit guilty? Louisa shrills into her sister's face. Unfortunately, this startles their grandpa, making him jump. Coffee spills from his cup, and a small brown smudge stains the tablecloth. You're not normal, Lou goes on. Normal people feel guilt when they deliberately do something wrong. Go to hell, Annie replies. What do you think, Grandpa? Lou leans over the table, seeking an ally. Aren't I right? Guilt is a complicated question, Daddy mutters, tugging on the cuff of his blazer, always a sign of distress. Both girls stare at him. But you are right. Most of us feel guilty once in a while. See, Grandpa agrees with me, says Lou with a satisfied smirk. It's none of your fucking business. Annabelle's ripe language stuns the table next to us into a distressed silence. Heads turn, brows furrow, lips purse. Oh, Annie, why do you always have to be so crude? Enough, shut up, both of you. I thrust the bill and a bundle of pound notes into Lou's lap. Deal with this. I'm going to walk your grandpa home. In future, my children can cross the Atlantic alone to visit their grandpa. They're adults, after all. But I worry they won't bother. Too easy to forget all the wonderful childhood holidays with their English grandparents. Daddy and I link arms and head along the street towards his flat. Through the sleeve of his blazer, I can feel his body stretched toward his piano wire. Whatever else is bothering him, Lou and Annie between them certainly seem to have hit a nerve. I wonder vaguely what set off Lou's alarming sense of moral indignation today. Pondering the predicament of guilt in its various guises, shame, remorse, regret, sin, Michael comes unbidden to my mind, as he so often does. But I'm positive I was never racked with guilt during our time together. Perhaps Annie inherited my guiltless gene. We reach Cross Keys Court, where my father has lived comfortably in a roomy garden flat since my mother's death 5 years ago. Quite suddenly, he pulls me back to reality. There's something I must discuss with you, Georgina. I thought as much, I whisper, kissing his cheek. You haven't been your usual genial self all week. What's got into you? I heard something recently, to do with the war. A bead of sweat pools on his forehead. The war? I'm bewildered. He's hardly ever spoken about those awful years. Of course, Mum invariably interrupted him. Stop picking away at it. Everybody had a terrible war. Nobody wants to be reminded. But I tread lightly, not wanting to discourage him in any way from continuing on. Tell me more. But we're interrupted by my daughters clumping up the path in their Doc Marten boots. Annabelle's henna-dyed frizz of hair, girdling her head in a massive cloud, looks even more ghastly in the porch light. She elbows her sister aside. Louisa, slightly shorter but perfectly proportioned, deftly thrusts out her foot. They arrive side by side, sulky now, ignoring each other. They really do exhaust me at times. Speak to you later, darling. Daddy turns the key in the lock and ushers us into the building. As soon as my badly behaved offspring head to bed, I pour generous glasses of port for Daddy and myself. We settle around the fireplace. I'm sorry the girls upset you this evening. I can't wait for them to properly grow up. They can be so obnoxious. He dismisses my comments with a wave of his hand. Do you remember, Georgie girl, after the war, when I got a short leave at the end of 1945, a whole year before I actually returned to England for good, I've often wondered. Of course I remember. How could I not? It was the very first time I set eyes on you. I'd been so thrilled to have a daddy in the house at last. My friends and I were growing up, uncertain what the role of a husband-daddy was supposed to be, since all able-bodied men had been away for so long. He stares bleakly into the artificial coals of the electric fire. I dreaded it. You didn't want to come home? An involuntary shiver snatches claw-like at my shoulders, and I reached to the floor for a cardigan Lou had discarded earlier. For a moment or two, Daddy tugs nervously at his cuffs again. No, I didn't, he finally mumbles. Been away such a long time. My mind spirals back to our first meeting, printed indelibly on my memory. I was in the backyard playing with my pet rabbit. The gate leading from the lane behind our house creaked open. A man I'd never seen before stood there staring at me. Why wasn't I afraid? Why hadn't I run into the kitchen? Because I'd instantly recognized him from a black and white studio portrait hanging above our mantelpiece. My daddy in his uniform. He dropped the filthy bag on the ground with a loud thud, sank to his knees, smiled, whispered my name, opened wide his arms. Calmly, I'd put my bunny into his hutch, latched the door tight, then catapulted myself into my daddy's life. But I was only 4 years old. Am I remembering things as they were, or as I want them to be? Getting home in one piece was what we all tried to stay alive for. Daddy gulps a mouthful of port. But when the time came, I found myself numb with fear. Why? What were you afraid of? Daddy rubs his chin. Being a disappointment, I suppose, or being disappointed, falling short somehow. When I'd begun to struggle with my own marriage, I'd grown more curious about how my parents managed to reconnect after being a continent apart for all the long years of the Second World War. I ache for a cigarette, a deep drag of nicotine into my lungs. But if I go outside now, he'll know damn well what I'm doing. After Daddy was forced to give up his beloved ciggies after the heart attack, I promised him I'd quit, which I almost have, just not completely. You've been fidgety since I got home, not yourself at all. I knew you had something on your mind. What is it you've heard? What is it you want to talk about? Daddy pauses, glances up as if the answer's somehow prowling around on the ceiling. Then he gazes directly at me with his familiar robin's egg blue eyes, draws a deep breath. Will you take me to Trieste? Northern Italy, where you ended up in 1945? He nods weakly. Does he really mean this? My father has never indicated any desire to return to the place where he'd served during the Allied occupation. In fact, after he was demobilized at the end of 1946, he refused to set foot in Europe again. So what has he just heard? What's changed? Why now? And why Trieste? Are you really up for traveling, being so far from home? If you help me. But his face has paled to a milky white. He looks all in. I seriously wonder if such a trip won't be too much for him so soon after the heart attack. I get up to pour myself another drink, stalling a bit for time. My fall schedule looms, school visits to prepare for, a literary conference in Seattle I've promised I will chair. But I suppose there's no reason I couldn't make some time after that. I've meetings with Penny scheduled in London for October to talk about Settled In Now. Before I sit down again, I draw the curtains across the French windows and turn on a table lamp. I'm completely unprepared for the unshed tears I see welling in my father's eyes as the light catches them. Putting an arm around his shoulder, I ask, is it really so important to you, Daddy? Yes, Georgie girl. Truth be told, it's beginning to dawn on me that he's offering on a platter the perfect opportunity to delay my return to the States a bit longer. Paul, my husband, won't be best pleased. But just like my father years ago, I don't really want to go home either. Not right now. Not to a stale, monotonous marriage, to the annual Wharton Labor Day holiday extravaganza rearing its predictable, boring head. Here's a perfect excuse to avoid my tedious extended family. and their even more tedious obligations for a couple more weeks. I'll work things out tomorrow, I promise. When I reach for my father's hand, I feel that old, comfortable twitch on the invisible thread that has connected us, comforted us, reassured us both since that long ago day when we set eyes on each other for the very first time.
Thank you, Janet. That was wonderful.
I do have a little bit more, if there's time, that I
Of course.
would. Okay. This is just a little bit from chapter 11, told in the point of view of the soldier who is in Trieste, Italy.
Wonderful.
Captain James Drummond slouched deep inside his khaki greatcoat. The train was freezing cold, no heat at all. Rain streaked the soot-grimed windows. The carriage was a fog of cigarette smoke. Deep in the captain's pocket was the pass granting him 3 weeks home leave, November 30th to December 21. When the train pulled into Newcastle Central Station, he heaved a kit bag splattered with numerous unidentifiable stains off the overhead rack and stepped onto the platform. The cavernous building was deserted. He slogged over the pedestrian bridge spanning the railway lines, boots ringing eerily through the rafters, startling to life a few dusty, pink-eyed pigeons. He had written a letter to Mary explaining about the leave, but had no idea whether it had reached England ahead of him. And in any event, he could not show up in the middle of the night. It would scare the living daylights out of his sleeping family. When he realized this, a profound sense of relief swept over him, a reprieve of sorts. He wasn't ready, not yet. Almost 5 years since he had seen his wife and their child an enigma. Surely, he reasoned, a few more hours would not make any difference, especially if they were not aware of his impending return. He realized he stank, sweat, vomit from seasick servicemen during the Channel crossing. Shaking a few English coins from his pocket, he paid for a wash in the station lavatory reserved for gentlemen. The tiled bathroom was small, but surprisingly clean. Sloughing off the filthy uniform, he sank into a tub full of hot water. With the miserable scrap of soap, he scrubbed his body raw. How long could he stay hidden in the cubbyhole? An hour? A day? A week? 3 weeks? But when the water grew cold, he dried himself off and found a reasonably clean uniform in the kit bag, dutifully pressed and packed by Larkins. When dawn broke over Newcastle, his ragged, war-weary city, the captain hoisted the bag onto his back and trudged through the streets, deliberately avoiding Grey Street and the bank he would have to return to when he was demobbed later next year. The reality filled him with dread. How would it be to shuffle papers and add up columns of figures in a stuffy room after commanding a company of men, being responsible for tactical decisions involving life and death, supplying ground logistical support in the midst of a battle? He feared the benign safety and boredom of the office would suck him in, close over his head, drown him. He plodded on, up Northumberland Street, along Osborne Road, past the Royal Grammar School, through Brandlin Park, down Eskdale Terrace to number 25. The iron railings around the little front garden, long gone for guns. An empty glass bottle stood on the doorstep. In the distance, he caught the rattle of the milk cart and the steady clip-clop of its horse. Captain James Drummond kept walking, away from his home. He walked another mile onto the town moor, a vast area of common land where freemen of the city still had the legal right to graze cattle. It was such a long time since he'd been privy to open space, unimpeded by trees, walls, or the possibility of sniper nests. But at the same time, the quiet was a bit unnerving. No rumbling tanks, no roaring planes, no exploding mines. He stretched out on a wooden bench, used the kit bag for a pillow. With a couple of hours rest, maybe he could find the courage to go home, step into the past, and be who he was before the blood, pieces of flesh, and mutilated bodies informed his dreams. Why hadn't he insisted Larkins accompany him home to serve as a sort of buffer? Larkins knew how to take care of him, protect him. Larkins understood him Only Larkins had been oddly reluctant to return with him. Was it simply the tug of Apache Salo, the opportunities to spoil the children who'd survived the war? Drummond wasn't sure. Finally, he slept.
Thank you, Janet.
Be nice to have an audience, wouldn't it?
I know. Everybody put the clap emoji in the chat, please.
Right.
Yeah, so thank you. It's great that we got to hear a little bit from the multiple timelines in the book, so people have a sense, if they have not read it, that, you know, there's characters in a more contemporary time period, and then there is, of course, the historical aspect of the war years. Yeah, so I have a question for you, and while I ask this question, if anyone else watching has one or many questions for Janet, please write those in the comments under the video, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. Just comment in the box there and we will see your questions. But my question for you is, what was the adjustment to writing for adults like? What's harder about it? What's easier about it? How did it go for you?
Well, I don't think it's harder or easier. I think, you know, I do everything from picture books through young adult to adult. So it's each of there's a different genre and a different challenge. And I had never considered that I would do that until after my father died. And I, you know, realized that he had never talked about the war at all. He wasn't physically damaged, but he had nightmares for the rest of his life. And that just, you know, was just part of my growing up. I thought all fathers did that. So it was a combination of wanting to challenge myself to see if I could, in fact, write a novel that incorporated where he'd been that I knew nothing about. And that allowed me to actually go to Slovenia and Italy to do research. And that I went with my first draft of the novel. And that was the most exciting thing probably in my entire life, because I was able to literally walk through my chapters and, you know, step into the castle where he'd been billeted, which was like a fairy tale. So that just kept propelling me to keep going and do it. And we're talking, you know, 5 or 6 years of work in order to produce something that's worth publishing. So, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. I really have, but it's a daunting thing to do in many ways. But I needed to do it because it connected me with him in so many ways. I think that's the best way I can explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question now from Dara. What do you think your father would have thought of this book? Do you think he would see himself in Captain Drummond?
No, I think he would have been shocked, quite frankly, because other than it being a soldier, you know, same age, same job, same everything, as far as I'm aware, he did not have an affair in Italy during the, you know, after the war. I think he would have had a you know, very difficult time understanding it. And it's bothered me at times, it's worried me at times. And then I thought, no, it's something I had to do. And I try to make it clear, this is not his story. The time and place is his story. And, you know, the fact that I'm writing about a father-daughter relationship is in some ways us, but not entirely. It is fiction.
So I guess to go off that, since, you know, it's not a one-to-one comparison, right? So where did Captain Drummond come from for you? How did you conceive of the character?
That's a very good question. It's not really easy to answer. When you're a writer, you've got to start, you know, all of us who write use little bits of people we know. There's no other way to do it. I mean, that's where you start. So obviously, physically, Drummond does resemble my father. But I had to say, okay, look at the photograph. This is my character, but I've got to move way beyond that and put Drummond in this situation and give him a backstory about love of poetry and the arts and music, terribly important to Drummond, and take it from there. And how would he react to this woman that he was just, it was an obsession. He just needed her so desperately. And in the novel, he has to let her go. And so all of that is just me putting myself in the head of a man, which also is not really easy, and to write the story. And I must also say that the daughter, Georgina, although same age as me, you know, the meeting was the same. But this is not my story either. And I did not have this relationship in London during my marriage. So I need to make that clear as well. But it is fun to take me and then move me in all kinds of directions that are delightful, that didn't happen to me. So that's the writer for you. We live in our imaginations.
Well, yeah. And it is true, too, that it is very common for novelists in particular, and frankly, particularly women novelists, to get asked the autobiographical aspect of it. It's very interesting, which, there's always a little bit in all people's work, but it's not a one-to-one thing. But going off that same theme, here's a question from Mary. What about other people in the book? Some of the other characters in the book come out of real people, are based on real people. Could you talk about them?
Only my daughters. And I will fess up right away that it was very cathartic for me to write about them. And they know it. But again, extrapolated further, but much of especially Annie in the novel is in fact my daughter Catherine, who the book is dedicated to. So if you're watching, Catherine, here I am being truthful. But everyone else, no, completely made up. There's a horrible mother-in-law in the novel, and I will make it clear I've never had a horrible mother-in-law. So yes. Really fun to create one and have her stir the pot and cause havoc and make Georgina's life miserable, which she did. So.
Oh, nice. What about the title? How did you? Where's that come from? How did you get there?
I did want to talk about that because it went through many titles instead of the title, and very much into probably 3 years into writing the novel, and Georgina was in the midst of a love affair with someone in London, and they go and have lunch at one of my most favorite hotels in London, and opposite there is this museum, and the name is escaping me right now, but anyway, in this museum, there is a famous picture called "A Girl on a Swing," and its nickname is "The Sting of Love," because it's a painting of a girl on a swing being pushed innocently by her husband, and in the foreground is her lover urging her to go higher and higher, and there is a beehive in the picture. It's a whole story about an illicit love affair. So in my novel, she is taken to see the picture as a sort of seduction, a way of seducing. So at that point, I had to call it "The Sting of Love" because it does happen to both of the characters anyway, the love affairs. So that's how that happened.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a great answer.
If anyone is interested, it's all on my website. Pictures of the hotel and the museum and the painting and lots of information.
Great. Looks like we have a clarifying question from Mary. The fighter woman in the book, the ones in the backstory about the war, are those based on something real or a real character? They're
No.
all you.
No, completely made up.
Sure.
But it was delightful when we, I decided to set the Alenka's character in this tiny little village on the Slovenian side. Well, the changed, the countries have changed a lot, but at the time, called Apache Salo. And when we set off to search for this village, everyone in Italy said there's no such place. And I knew there was because I, Googled it. So in the end, and Catherine was with me, she was helping me on this trip. We found the village. So in the novel, it's very much as I explain it. And it was lovely to find a little hairdresser with the name Alenka over the shop front. So, but no, Alenka purely came out of my imagination. The fact, the facts of the partisans are real. I mean, the historical facts are very much absolutely true. But no, she was completely made up.
Gotcha. Another question from Dara. Could you talk about the book design process?
Oh, yes.
Great question.
Well, that was wonderful because I got, I got to discuss it with the artist himself. Luke Bird designed the cover. And we went through, he read the novel, which was so exciting to me. But the most wonderful sort of perfect moment was that he, in fact, comes from the same hometown I do, which is Newcastle. Wow. And so when I read those streets that the soldier was walking through in the second reading I did, Luke knew he went to that Royal Grammar School. So he was, I had him on my side, so to speak. But we went through all kinds of ideas for what I thought I was looking for, because, I really didn't know what I was looking for. But in the end, this is Miramare. The castle on the cover is Castello di Miramare, which is where my father was billeted.
Oh yeah, why don't you show the cover there? The camera. There we go. Move it. There it is, everybody. It's lovely.
So the idea of almost sort of explosive clouds is because there are two frightful explosions in the story. One happens to the soldier and his lover, and the other happens to Georgina in London years later. So I just like the idea of, sort of fire and blowing up, for want of a better way of putting it.
No, that's great. I'm glad it was a good process for you. And
it was wonderful, and the fact that he and I actually are both Geordies. That's what we're called on the River Tyne in Newcastle.
Yes.
So that was just icing on the cake for me. It really was.
That's great. I should also tell you, besides questions over here in the chat, I also there are indeed some clap emojis that happened after you read, and some bravos and all of that. So thank you everyone who was watching and clapping in your homes. All right, so are you working on anything else? Are you going to do another book for adults? That's always the $1 million question.
It is.
What's next?
Well, first of all, I do want to say I have 2 children's books coming out next year.
Yes.
So, lovely switcheroo. And, I'll be busy doing marketing for those books as well. And I had told myself that I did not have the time, the health, or the strength to write another adult novel because of the time it takes to do it. But having said that, of course, there are a couple of characters in my head hammering away, wanting me to write another novel. There was some research left over from Trieste that I wanted to use, nothing at all to do with The Sting of Love.
Right.
But it was I found out that, sorry, I'm backtracking a little bit, but in Trieste, the Nazis had built the only extermination camp on Italian soil.
Mm.
And we went there. I mean, it's dreadful to do, you know, I mean, it's so important to go and see these places and realize what happened. And so I was very intrigued with the Nazi SS colonel who ran the place and then escaped from Trieste into southern Austria at the end of the war.
Mm.
He was caught by the British, who were searching for all these people to send to Nuremberg for the trials, and they caught this man, and he committed suicide by biting down on his cyanide pill 2 or 3 days later. But there was always, as there always is in these cases, there were stories about, well, maybe he didn't really, and maybe he escaped. And so I couldn't let that alone. That just intrigued me enormously. So I've got 60 pages written of a new adult novel in which this SS colonel did in fact survive. And then the story moves all over the place. It goes back to Newcastle in England, London, and we'll see. You know, I may see the end of my days collapsing over my computer, but that's fine because I'll be doing what I love to do. So
Yes.
So yes, you know, that's a long-winded way of saying I am indeed.
You're working.
Another novel. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a very common refrain I hear from authors in these type of events is there's a piece of information that they find or that found in research for another project, or that they just have always thought was cool and know a lot about, but just haven't used it yet. And that's often where a project comes out of, is they just, I know this, and so I need to do something with it.
And it surprised me. It did surprise me, but one of the very enjoyable things we've done in Trieste was go to the opera. The opera house is just gorgeous. And in the Sting of Love, the soldier takes Alenka to the opera. And so that was another place that I just was so intrigued with. So I'm using a chorus girl from the opera to connect with the colonel. And so we go from there.
Very nice. Well, I think we have made it through all of the questions. And again, just, you know, some lovely things here, and those were very good questions, those of you who asked. So I'll just say thank you, Janet. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us for this event. I think it's been great. If you are interested in the Sting of Love, go to our website. It is majorsandquinn.com, and I also dropped the direct link to the book in the comments here, so you can check that out. We're open to limited browsing if you happen to be in the Twin Cities area. We're open noon to 7. And we also ship books everywhere, and you can purchase things for store pickup. So it's very easy to get your book, very easy to get it from Majors and Quinn. And yeah, you should also be on the lookout in the future for more children's books from Janet. They will also be available at Majors and Quinn, and maybe we'll have you back on screen.
Well, thank you, Annie. This really was a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. This has been wonderful.
Despite the glitch.
Yeah. Hey, we rolled with it, and you got to, yeah, everything's looking fine now. It's great. And we got to hear all about this wonderful book, and we very much look forward to your future projects.
Thank you
so much. Thank you, everyone, for watching.